Hi everyone, welcome to the Vikas Dhakar show, and this is my first video on this channel where we try to understand the global events with a calm and rational analysis. In today's video, we will break down how the United States got stuck in this war and why it is unable to move forward or step back, and what this means for the future of global politics. If you are tired of noise and wants to understand the full picture with the logic and clarity, then stay with me till the end. So today, instead of asking who is winning or how many strikes have happened, I want to focus on a deeper and a more uncomfortable question. Can the United States actually stop this war? Or can it negotiate a ceasefire, step back, and find a clean exit? Or has the situation reached a point where no option is truly workable? When we examine the situation carefully, the answer becomes troubling. The United States appears to be in a position where moving forward is risky, but stepping back may be even more damaging. It is not a simple conflict anymore. It is a structural trap. To understand this, we first need to recognize a basic pattern of modern wars. Once a conflict of this scale begins, it starts developing its own internal momentum. Decisions are no longer fully controlled by leaders or policymakers. Instead, the war itself begins to shape the decisions. Uh, we have already seen this pattern in Ukraine. That conflicts began in Feb 2022, and very early on, there were opportunities for negotiation. Both sides were aware of the economic damage, the human cost, and the long term risks. Yet, years later, the conflict continues. Not because peace is impossible, but because stopping requires accepting losses, compromises, and outcomes that are politically and psychologically difficult. Government often find it's harder to accept defeat than to continue suffering losses. The same pattern is now visible in the Iran situation. Neither side is likely to openly accept defeat. We can see none of the countries winning. Even if we continuing the conflict is not in their best interest, and this is where the situation becomes more complicated than Ukraine. Even if the United States want to stop it, it may not be able to accept the condition required for the peace. Let us think through hypothetical scenario. Suppose the United States reaches out through diplomatic channels, possibly through intermediaries like Oman or Qatar, and propose a ceasefire. Iran may agree to negotiate, but condition it sets could fundamentally alter the global balance of power. One possible demand could be involves massive financial compensation, potentially in the range of hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars, justified by decades of sanctions and wartime damage. But the more critical demand would likely be strategic, not financially. Uh, Iran's may Iran's core concern is long-term security. Uh, from its perspective, the only way to ensure that such conflict does not repeat is to remove the American military presence from the region entirely. At a first glance, some may argue that the United States is reducing its presence in the Middle East is not necessarily negative. However, this view does not fully account for the chain of reaction that could follow. The Middle East is not just a political region; it is deeply tied to the global economic system, and we are observing it, right? The impacts of this war, particularly through the energy markets. We know like how this region impacts the global economy. So currently, countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, operate under a security structure that has historically relied on American military protection. So these arrangements allows them to function independently. If that protection is suddenly removed, these states would have to reconsider their security. In such scenario, Iran becomes the most dominant regional power capable of influencing stability, especially given its geographic control over the critical points like Strait of Hormuz. Over this time, um like this could shift these countries closer to Iran's sphere of influence. This shift would have significant economic implications. One of the most important system connected to this region is the global oil trade, which is largely conducted in the US dollar. The system creates consistent global demand for the dollar as countries need it to purchase energy. Additionally, many of the revenue generated by oil exporting countries are reinvested into the US financial markets, particularly government debt. Um, this process play a key role in sustaining the American economic system. If the so things this way, if the regional dynamics change and oil trade began shifting away from dollar-based transaction, the global demand for dollar could weaken. Given the scale of a U.S. national debt, which stands at a tens of trillions of dollars, this would create serious financial pressure. The concern is not immediate collapse, but gradual erosion of economic stability and global financial influence. At the same time, other regions would also respond. Countries like Japan, South Korea, which are currently rely on US security guarantees, may begin reassessing their strategies. If they perceive that American commitments are uncertain, they may invest more heavily in their own military capabilities. This could reduce their dependence on the United States and shift regional dynamics in Asia. In Europe, similar recalculations could occur. European countries have supported US positions in conflicts such as Ukraine, uh, often at a significant economic cost. If they begins to view the United States as a less consistent or a less dominant globally, they may prioritize their own stability over alignment, potentially seeking negotiated arrangements with countries like Russia. All these changes taken together could gradually weaken the position of the US dollar as the primary global reserve currency. If the fewer countries rely on it for trade and reserves, the broader economic system supporting American financial strength could face long-term challenges. So this explains like why simply leaving the conflict is not a straightforward option. The cost of staying is high, but the potential consequences of withdrawal are also significant. So this is the core of the strategic dilemma. Now, if withdrawal and negotiations are both difficult, the pressure naturally shifts towards escalation. This brings us to the risk of ground involvement. There have been discussions and reports about limited deployment, possibly involving Marines and strategic targets such as Kharg Island, which handles the major portion of the Iran's exports. On a paper, targeting such location could disrupt Iran's economic capacity. However, military operations are rarely that simple. Uh, this island is geographically close to the Iran's mainland, making it vulnerable to the counterattacks. Securing it require controlling surrounding areas, including coastal regions. From there, the situation could escalate further into a mountainous terrains like the Zagros Mountains. At the point, limited operations risk turning into a broader ground conflicts within Iran itself. History provides a clear example of how such situation evolve. In Vietnam, what happens as a limited deployment expanded into a large-scale military commitment. Once resources, lives, and national credibility are invested, it becomes difficult to withdraw. This is often described as the sunk cost problem, where past investment influence continued decisions even when the situations no longer makes strategic sense. Another important factor to consider is military preparedness and the strategic design. Modern conflicts are not only about strength but also about the capability. Uh, Iran has just uh, Iran has spent decades studying how the United States conduct the warfare. Instead of matching it directly, it has developed strategies to counter it. So these include decentralized operations, use of drones, missile system, underground infrastructure, and regional alliances. The goal is not to defeat the United States in a conventional sense, but to make the cost of engagement extremely high. Even advanced assets like aircraft carriers, including the USS Abraham Lincoln, USS Gerald Ford, while powerful, operate within risks of constant. Moving them too close to hostile zones increase vulnerability. This limits their role in direct engagements and reflects the complexity of modern warfare. Given all these factors, the question then becomes, what is the path forward? The conflict in Iran is not isolated, it is connected to a broader global tensions involving China, Russia, and India and shifting power structures. One interpretation is that the current situation reflects a transition in the global order where no single country can dominate all regions simultaneously without facing increasing strain. A possible long term solution would involve a shift from dominance based strategy to a more cooperative framework where a major powers acknowledge each other's interest and work toward stability through negotiation rather than confrontation. This would require significant changes in approach, including reducing military overextension and focusing more on diplomatic engagements. However, whether such a shift is politically feasible is uncertain. It requires not only strategic thinking but also domestic acceptance, which can be challenging in any country. So, when we look at the entire situation, the conclusion is not simple. The conflict has momentum, negotiation is difficult due to high stakes, withdrawal carries a systematic risk, escalation leads to a deeper involvement, and a military victory is not guaranteed in a traditional sense. This creates a situation where there are no easy choices, only a complex trade-offs. The longer the decisions are, the longer decisions are delayed, the more complicated and the costly those choices may become. Not just for one country, but for the global system as a whole. So the real question is not just about this war, but about how global powers choose to navigate a changing world. And that answer will shape not just this conflict but many others in the years ahead. If you found this analysis useful, you can subscribe for more such breakdowns in a simple and a clear language. And I would genuinely like to hear your perspective. Do you think the United States can find a stable way out, or are we looking at a prolonged conflict similar to what we have seen in other regions? Thank you. Kindly subscribe my channel.